And John Blaxland is a Professor of International Security and Intelligence Studies at the ANU, and he joins us now from Canberra. John Blaxland, welcome. So what have been your thoughts as you've seen those images coming in from Kabul airport and reflected over what's happened over the last 20 years?
Look, no one involved could possibly feel anything but sadness at what they're witnessing, but also a sense of perhaps catharsis as well, because what we are witnessing is the final stage of a drawn-out melodrama that has been a tragedy unfolding for quite some time. The Taliban were backed by multiple players, clearly elements in Pakistan backing them. They were resourced, they had morale, and in battle, as you know, there's an adage that morale is as to combat fighting, weapons, about 3-to-1 the ratio. And certainly the Taliban had the morale. The American withdrawal confirmed an already low morale on the Afghan National Security Forces side. That was then, of course, demonstrated terribly in the way successive cities fell to the Taliban without a fight, demonstrating that there really was no resolve, despite all of the resources allocated, the high tech, the training, the numbers of people put through this the Afghan National Security Forces to defend the government that we had helped set up. There just wasn't the heart. They weren't in it. And there's a saying, people are saying, oh, well, the people of Afghanistan have spoken. My sense is it's the men who've spoken. I doubt you'd find, if you poll the women of Afghanistan, that they'd be terribly happy about this outcome. And of course, the Taliban have never subjected themselves to a vote. But they have the power, they have the guns now, they have way more guns than they have had before, because they've taken hold of major caches of weapon systems, of drones and high-tech systems that are going to super enable the Taliban for a generation to come. And that's really very disconcerting.
So taking into account, as you say, there wasn't the passion among Afghan security forces to defend what had been set up, how do you feel about Joe Biden's decision to withdraw troops?
Look, there's a debate. The community, the pundits, the punditry, if you like, the strategic studies punditry is divided on this. There is a view out there that the United States didn't have to commit that much more on an enduring basis to make Afghanistan kind of bumble on through, and there is conversely a view that no, the wound had to be lanced, the situation had to be resolved, because there is now a much greater contestation across the Eurasian landmass, with China and Russia joining forces effectively. The great power contestation is back on in a way that makes the Cold War look relatively pale, arguably. And the operations in Afghanistan, the commitment to Afghanistan is a distraction. But of course, there's also ramifications across the Middle East. US partners across the Middle East are now wondering about what kind of resilience the United States has. Is the United States a fair weather friend? How much can they turn to countries like Australia? And of course, Australia is implicated enormously in what we've done there. For 20 years, we've really been reluctant to play a leading role. We've been wanting to be part of the negotiations, but not really a prominent role, because we had so many other issues to deal with in our own neighbourhood, insecurities around the South Pacific and Southeast Asia that have worried us. So that's an understandable rationale, but it's left us with this kind of cynical, half-baked strategy that really amounts to very little. The problem is here, Joe, as you know, our ADF personnel are remarkably professional, overwhelmingly professional, and the Brereton report is exception to the rule, which kind of proves the rule. But that is not good enough. Tactical proficiency, excellence, professionalism at the tactical and operational level doesn't cut it if the strategy is flawed. And what we've seen, and Joe Biden spoke to this, is a manifestation of 2 decades of flawed strategy, where commanders and politicians kind of deluded each other into thinking that, well, we'll just keep doing this for a couple more years and hopefully it'll resolve itself. And of course, it never was going to, except this way. But what is interesting is that it's happened so precipitously. Who would have thought that Kabul would just cave like that after the Afghan National Security Forces had been so well resourced? So they had the numbers, they had the equipment, they had the support they needed, and yet there was just no resolve. The morale had collapsed. as some pundits have noted, there is an incredible ability to survive. The survival instinct of Afghans is profound. And what we see there is, with the folding in front of the Taliban, a recognition by some of those players that, well, I'd rather live to fight another day than fight here and die. And so Kabul has been spared that fight between the Afghan National Security Forces and the Taliban. But the fight to come is perhaps the most disturbing one. Will the Afghan Taliban live up to their declaration recently that women can go to school, they can wear the hijab, not the burqa, and that people will be treated fairly and equally? When you're in power, hubris and power leads to opportunities for revenge. And my concern is that we need to double down on rescuing people at this moment, because there is potentially considerable more bloodshed yet to happen, while behind scenes without cameras showing it. So we need to do what we can to support the Americans in this final stage of extraction, helping as many people as possible to get out. And it just seems that the Taliban has done a deal with the US military to allow this to happen, because clearly Kabul airport is vulnerable to interference, but they haven't done that. So here's hoping that Australia can help and that campaign will be successful over the coming days.
What do you make of Joe Biden's assertion that the campaign was never supposed to be about nation building?
Well, this is part of the problem with the lack of a clear strategy. We've flipped and flopped and we've changed direction half a dozen times. And going back to the decision in February 2002 to let the Taliban and Al-Qaeda escape through the Tora Bora Mountains, not directly, but by doing things in half measures, by subcontracting the blocking force to a militia that could equally be bought off and was bought off by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So they slipped through the cracks, and it's been pretty much downhill since then. Of course, the distraction of the war in Iraq then consolidated that, allowed for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to rehabilitate in the Pashto borderlands between Afghanistan and Pakistan and return, while the United States was distracted in Iraq and no one else really wanted to pick up the ball and run with things in Afghanistan. And besides, the strategy had been set back in 2002, setting up with Hamid Karzai, a guy who arguably was well-meaning but not respected and not appreciated and didn't have the power to make the country work. Oh, man.
Yeah, but if missions like this are not about nation building, what of the likelihood then that these places will continue? You might stamp out Al-Qaeda, but this place will continue to be a breeding ground, a safe haven for terrorists. So what's the point?
Yeah, well, that's right. And that's what countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and others in the neighbourhood are all worried about, that this is actually going to give them kind of super enable the Taliban to be the breeding ground. We know that they are connected with Al-Qaeda and the Haqqani network, and that the kind of the extreme elements of fundamentalist Islamist violence is very well connected to the Taliban. So the idea of this mild-mannered, respectful front that's been put on at the moment is just that. It's a front. The question is how long before the facade falls, and we see the return to the kind of badlands of terrorist hubs emerging in southern Afghanistan and elsewhere. This is the grave concern. I guess the calculation now is by the United States was, well, maybe that's a problem for the neighbouring countries, Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, the other stands. Maybe they can deal with it, because I guess the sense is also now that the United States has effectively made the United States itself a harder target. 9/11, it's hard to imagine it recurring because of the security measures that have been put in place. And as I say, in the great power equation, and you balance out the odds, the bottom line is that they're now the challenge of Russia and China in cahoots, affecting dynamics across the eastern and western side of the Eurasian landmass, means that is a graver concern, a more focusing challenge for the US and for the US military into the future. And that's where we'll probably see the focus, even though we'll probably see continued efforts by Islamist extremist groups and others to foment unrest, to draw attention to themselves, to make life difficult for the United States and its allies in the Middle East, particularly but also further abroad because of the inspiration effect. The demonstration effect of the success of the Taliban will undoubtedly invigorate extremists in southern Philippines, in Indonesia, perhaps southern Thailand, and other parts of the Levant and the Middle East.
And how do you feel for the Afghans who've been given this taste of the freedoms now over the past 20 years or so, which will now be ripped away?
So, back in 1975, the United States, in April 1975, evacuated over 100,000 people from South Vietnam, and they have made incredible citizens. And many of others who didn't get away then subsequently escaped about 1979, 1981. Many of them come to Australia. I think we need to be looking to do something akin to that this time around. It's going to be very difficult, but I think we need to really ramp up our efforts. And I know we're trying, the ADF is contributing, but we need to be very supportive of a sustained effort to enable people who are like-minded, who don't want to live under the Taliban, to get out and come. This is a land of plenty. There's space for many of them to come here. When you think about how successful the Vietnamese have integrated into Australia, we need to be open-minded, broad-minded and generous in our spirit as we think about the legacy we want. The real legacy from now on is what we do for those people who need a home outside of Afghanistan, outside from under the jackboot of the Taliban.
Yeah. John Blaxland, the exasperation in your voice is notable. Let's hope that effort to get people out is successful and get as many Afghans out who want to get out that is done effectively over the coming weeks.
Thanks, Joe.